All right, everybody, welcome back. Ready for another deep dive.
Always ready to dive in.
Awesome. So today we're heading down to the Sunshine State to check out what's going on with Florida's economy.
Sounds good to me.
Yeah, so we've got these really interesting excerpts from Florida Realtor News from November 22nd, 2024.
Oh, yeah, I saw that one.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and there's a really cool image in the related online article that kind of sums things up.
Okay.
And it's all about, economic optimism, but with a little bit of a twist.
Okay. Yeah, I think I know what you're talking about.
Yeah, so it looks like there's some good news, but then there's also this kind of lingering worry about inflation that just doesn't seem to want to go away.
Right. Yeah. It's a very interesting picture of what's happening right now.
Right.
Yeah, you see some good signs, but then there's also this feeling of uncertainty underneath it all, especially when you start to think about the long term.
Yeah, okay, so let's break it down a little bit. The Florida Realtor News article talks about how the expectations index went up for Republicans but went down for Democrats.
Interesting.
Yeah, it's like people are looking at the same economy but seeing totally different things.
Yeah, exactly. It's like that index is kind of like a gauge of how optimistic people feel about the future of the economy.
Right.
So if the readings are high, it means people think things are going to be great and they'll spend more money and invest more.
Right.
But then when the numbers go down, people get a little more cautious. They maybe hold back on spending or making big purchases.
Oh, yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, like battening down the hatches.
Right.
And what's really interesting here is how much this is tied to, the whole political situation.
So does that mean that Republicans are just naturally more optimistic about the economy right now?
Well, I don't think it's necessarily about being naturally optimistic or pessimistic.
Okay.
It's more about how people see things, how they perceive things. Like, the article doesn't really get into the reasons why there's this difference between Republicans and Democrats. Yeah. But, it probably has to do with how people think these recent changes in politics are going to affect their own personal finances.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Okay, well, let's look at some actual numbers for a second.
Sure.
The article mentions that the expectations index went up, but then it also says that the current economic conditions index actually went down.
Mm-hmm.
So isn't that kind of a contradiction?
Well, it does seem like there's a bit of a disconnect between what's happening right now in the short term and what people think is going to happen in the long term.
Okay.
Think of it like this. The current conditions index is like looking at your bank account today.
Okay.
It's just a snapshot of what's happening right now.
Right.
But the expectations index is more like thinking about your next paycheck.
Okay.
Like maybe you're a little short on cash right now, but, you're getting a bonus soon or a raise.
Yeah.
So you feel pretty good about the future, even though things might be a little tight at the moment.
Right. Yeah, and that actually kind of reminds me of that image in the online article.
Oh, yeah?
It's got these trend lines, and you can see really clearly that expectations are going up, but current conditions are going down a little bit.
Yep.
But here's the really interesting part. Even though people seem to be feeling more positive about the future long-run inflation, expectations are actually going up.
Right.
So how does that even make sense?
Well, that's where we get into this idea of a self-fulfilling prophecy.
Oh, okay.
So let's say, for example, you're worried that housing prices in Florida are going to go way up next year.
Mm-hmm.
What are you going to do?
Probably try to buy a house right now.
Exactly. Even if it means spending more than you really wanted to.
Right.
Just to avoid paying even more later.
Yeah.
But then if a lot of people do that all at once, what happens?
Prices go up.
Exactly. It's like worrying about a storm so much that you end up creating one yourself.
Wow, that's a really good point.
Yeah. So even if there are some positive signs in the economy, that fear of inflation can really throw things off.
Right. And speaking of fear, the article also mentions that there's more uncertainty now about long-term inflation.
Right.
Why is being uncertain a bad thing?
Well, think of it like trying to drive in really thick fog.
Okay.
The road is there, but you can't see very far ahead.
Yeah.
So you slow down, you hesitate, you're not really sure what to do.
Right.
And in the economy, it's kind of the same thing. Businesses might not want to invest. People might hold off on making big purchases.
Right.
And the whole system can start to slow down.
Wow. So it's like we've got this mixed bag of good and bad news.
Yeah, exactly.
Like there's some positive things happening, but then there's this cloud of, political stuff and inflation worries hanging over everything.
Absolutely. And I think that really shows just how complicated the economy is and how much it's connected to, people's feelings and what's going on in politics.
Yeah.
And that brings up a really important question for everyone listening. How do you make financial decisions when things are so uncertain?
Right.
Do you play it safe or do you try to take advantage of the situation?
Yeah, that's a tough one.
It is.
I think this deep dive has given us a lot to think about.
Definitely.
One thing's for sure, though. You got to pay attention to both the data and how people are feeling, and make smart choices based on your own situation.
Absolutely. Couldn't agree more.
Thanks for joining us for another deep dive, everybody.
Yeah, thanks for listening.
We'll see you next time.
See you later.